It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Paul Chabot is joining us. He is a nominee for a seat in the U.S. Congress. The seat is currently held by Gary Miller. It's a seat in the Inland Empire. Sir, I received a press release from your office, and I was so compelled that I really wanted to bring you on. It's not a press release you expect to get from a candidate for office. The title of the press release is Chabot discusses his adolescent addiction and recovery. Good for you. That's all I got to say for being so honest. And when you say adolescent, you've been sober since the age of 12.
Correct.
Wow, sir. Talk to me.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. For the folks at home watching, I am 40 years old.
Right.
And I know I look like I'm still 12.
Exactly right. Right.
So, I've had a very blessed life with challenges that began out young, like many kids today, especially growing up in the 1980s, where parents, high divorce rate. And
lots of marijuana, alcohol, and cocaine
huge,
floating around.
Absolutely. So I slipped down a slippery slope pretty quick at the age of 10. Began experimenting with alcohol, marijuana, and then began to use it quite heavily. And I was getting in trouble at school with law enforcement taking me home at all hours, and a mom who was frustrated and trying to find a better way to raise us. And so she gave me an option. She put me in a car, drove me to a juvenile hall facility, showed me what those look like, and drove me to a youth rehabilitation program, and had a chance to say, look, son, the choice is up to you. You want your life to go down the tubes, or you want to get some help? And after about a week of thinking about it and still,
fighting.
Yes. Decided that it was time to look and get some help. And I lived in an inpatient youth drug rehabilitation program, city of Redlands, for about 36 days, I believe.
Wow.
And it was truly a life-changing environment. So yeah, as a so-called politician, public servant running for office, I wear my sobriety on my sleeve because, quite honestly, there isn't a family that's not affected. They don't have a son, a daughter, a father, somebody in their close proximity who's dealt with addiction. And I think we need to do a better job as a society talking about it so we can find ways to make these problems smaller.
And you've been talking about it for 25 years.
28 years, yeah.
Well, but literally, I mean, professionally and otherwise, you worked in 2 White Houses focusing on drug policy. Sure. I hope it's okay that I say your wife works in addiction programs.
Right.
I mean, this is really part of what makes you who you are, this drive toward the virtues of sobriety.
It is, and I look at life through the lens of being a father. I have 4 kids, and
wow.
It's, nothing better than being a daddy.
Right.
I'm sure mommies say nothing better than being a mommy.
Right.
But to me, it's what kind of community we want our little ones raised in. And so, obviously I am a Republican running for a seat, but some of these issues I see should be non-political. Keeping kids off drugs, out of gangs. I think we should find ways to work together to make these problems smaller, and I pledge to do all I can in our communities and our nation to do just that.
What's interesting, you talk about kids and trying to keep them away from drugs, and without politicizing what's happening right now at the border, what we know is that many of these unaccompanied minors that are coming over, they are coming for a variety of reasons, but many of them to avoid being forced into these drug cartels.
Sure.
I mean, it's just crushing and devastating when you hear this. I have no idea what the solution is. Maybe you do, given you're running for Congress. But this is a human issue. It's a human tragedy.
It is. And I've been in the military 13 years, reserve deputy sheriff for 19 years. And when we look at the issues, we look to the folks who are on our left and our right. We don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, what your status is with religion. It's that we have one mission, one team, one fight, and that's to make the problem smaller. So my dissertation work is on Mexican drug cartels.
Right, exactly, right.
And wrote a book on the drug cartels. So the frightening thing is, Latin America, all of America, Mexico, what they're dealing with is 2 key problems: lack of societal rule of law and corruption. And so what I pledge to do in Congress is to ensure that the federal dollars that we are allocating already to our southern neighbors is going to go to programs that are really going to turn the needle on increasing societal rule of law.
I want to focus on that because I don't think we in America have a clue what that means.
Sure.
Lack of societal law.
Yep.
I mean, it truly is. I can't even call it the Wild West. It's beyond the Wild West.
It is. If you look at the conditions in Mexico and the conditions in Latin America, the conditions in Iraq, there's really no difference in when we look at, you can pinpoint any area on the globe, most of Africa today, for example, and you can go and look at if there are judges who are corrupt, cops who are corrupt, taking money and bribes, very much happens throughout the Middle East. Whenever you have a part of the world that deals with those conditions, you are going to have sophisticated organized crime. The United States dealt with this in the 1920s in Chicago.
But let's look at, for example, our southern neighbors, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala.
Sure.
I mean, that is where the majority of these unaccompanied minors are coming from.
Right.
And that is kind of, you know, ground zero for lack of societal law.
Sure.
I mean, look, an anecdote doesn't make proof, but we've all read the stories, heard the stories about kids that, you know, they walk into school in Honduras and they're told you either become a drug user or a drug runner.
Right. And we can look to some successes the U.S. has had with Colombia. Plan Colombia in the 1980s was not a perfect plan, but it did turn the corner in helping them root out corruption and increasing societal rule of law. So we can look at programs like that, become a little bit more strict and firm on how our federal dollars are providing assistance to foreign nations, and mandate that they actually move to improve the needle.
So what should we do with these kids? I mean, when these kids come to the border and they say, and let's just take them at their word. We have, you know, one kid that says to us, I came here because when I was in school, I was being told either I become a drug user or a drug runner. What do we do with that kid? Is that reason enough to allow that child to stay? In your mind?
Sure. So, you know, I look at the kids as victims, and my priority is so that kids have a great future. I think adults are the problem here, as most of the place. We can look at many of American cities where these kids have the same option. If they're inner city of LA, inner city Chicago, inner city many areas, those kids are presented with the same options. Either you join us or you're going to become our enemy, and so you have a choice.
So, okay.
With the children that are coming up, we absolutely need to bring them back home. However, if there's legitimate refugee status, what we need to encourage them to do is approach our consulates in those nations. There is a set-up procedure and process.
Right, but is there, I mean, look, you have a kid, he's sitting in El Paso.
Right.
Somehow he got here. Is it your view that we're sorry, even though you seem to be, you know, your story seems to wash out, we're going to have to send you home?
Yeah, I think, you know, the cases are unique and different. We need to depend on the professionals along the border to differentiate, you know, who is really coming up forward. We know that they're coming up with handwritten pieces of paper that are almost identical, saying the same story over and over again because they understand.
We get it, but what if, you know, look, I don't know, if it is proven that this child's story is accurate?
Yep. Then the United States absolutely has a role and a mission to look at that and provide the status and the protection through our judicial process to expedite. And I think we are doing that as a country. I think we're looking at, because the process right now with the judges that are supposed to review these processes, it can take years. And what are we going to do? You know, hold a 9, 10, 12-year-old kid for 2 years through the process? I think we have to look at every case unique. There is no perfect plan for this, but we do have to send a message to Latin America that you cannot continue to send all these children.
I know Vice President Biden went to try to convince them, you know, PSAs are blaring through the streets. I got to ask you about Iraq. I mean, you served in Iraq, no?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so, I mean, it breaks your heart. I mean, that country is falling apart.
It breaks my heart. It breaks the heart of all of our men and women who fought over there, who know people who've lost their lives, to families who here are struggling. Look, I was there in 2008 during the surge. The surge worked. We were able to shrink al-Qaeda by about 90% by focusing in on their money. Al-Qaeda was decimated. They could no longer pay their foreign fighters. They squeezed up to the northern town of Mosul. We had al-Qaeda on the brink of really minimizing their effects. When, unfortunately, this administration announced the withdrawal and what we've seen today, al-Qaeda is stronger across the globe.
But isn't al-Qaeda, though?
Well, it's interesting because you have ISIS and al-Qaeda, which are actually battling. ISIS, I think, is more extreme than al-Qaeda. But there is the Caliphate ideology is what unites them. And they look at Iraq as their next homeland.
And you have a country that really wanted the administration to pull out. I mean, that was the challenge. I mean, we were done.
Well, we were on the verge of doing some good things there to actually, I think, turning Iraq into a democracy. I think today all that is lost.
You'll come back?
Absolutely.
His name is Paul Chabot. He is a candidate for Congress. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.